Hello, everyone. This is Leah Love. Welcome to yet another edition of Leah Love Online. I'm so happy that you are here. If you are new, welcome. And if you are OG with me, I appreciate you coming back for more content. Today, I want to discuss and dissect a brief discussion or interview of Shelby Steele. And he talks about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, which is the subject of Black Americans thinking that the grass is greener in other pastures, while at the same time not taking true advantage of the opportunities that they have here in America. And this is based on a long held ideology as well as communist infusion in their education, that they are perpetual victims and that they don't belong in this country and that no one wants them in this country and that they will always be struggling for racial equality, even in 2020. And so this is an excellent discourse that I think it's time for us to dissect. Let's get to it.
Now, you write in Shame about a trip that you took to Africa at the age of 23. Let me quote Shame. This entire trip was organized around visits to cities like Algiers, cities associated with independence movements and revolutions that had swept the third world in the 1950s and 60s. I wanted to see if there was some counterpoint to the American way of life that was better.
Yeah.
And what did you see?
Well, I didn't find that.
And well, of course, he was not going to find that, but I am giving him high praise for at least traveling to the continent to test out the ideologies that he had been taught in the university, as well as within the predominant Black culture in general, which states that, other communist revolutionary movements in other countries are going to be producing these great, utopian societies, and that they are going to be able to use the same tactics here in America to create the same sort of utopia that they thought was going to be the results of what was happening in Africa, for instance, in the 50s and 60s, where there were a lot of fights for freedom against colonialism. But what he found was quite different. And for some reason, this information never seemed to have trickled down into the Black community. And I wish that it had, because I think things would be so much different for the Black community if only they had gotten that feedback. But unfortunately, a lot of the people who did go to Africa during the 50s, 60s, and 70s always came back with this utopian ideology, which was not actually the case 100%. Not to say that some people didn't have great experiences, but for them to constantly be peddling this idea that Black Americans are so disserviced in America that they'd be better off somewhere else. And it's just not the truth.
But I think, I was coming of age. I was a college student. I was just out of college. I was working in war and poverty programs. And there was a point, because after the civil rights victories in the sort of late 60s, where Black people began to create this identity that we called Blackness. It was angry, and it was resentful, and it was separatist. And there was the illusion in it somehow that we would get farther as a separate, unified people than we would by joining America and becoming regular citizens.
And quite honestly, I can't agree more, because that is infused into the Black education and the Black culture. There has been this sense of separate and not equal. And so though there was this fight for, to desegregate America, but at the same time, there was this counter movement to remain separate, remain angry, remain in victimology, and somehow create this separate identity that though they were in the United States, they did not belong to the United States, and the United States did not feel that they belonged. And we tend to see that even today in 2020, where now we have BLMers saying that, this has been the most racist decade in America's history. And that's just not so. But because of a cultural ideology that states that they have to be separate from America, and that they have to be Blackness and Black culture or Black Americans as opposed to Americans, what it does is kept them in a bubble where they are not really acknowledging the reality of what's actually going on. And that tends to decrease opportunities and one's life experience.
I confess, I was caught
And I confess I was caught up too.
up in that. I wanted to see, and it was what was so seductive about it is that it said, Blackness is the answer to all of your anxieties about life, what you should do, where you should I go to graduate school? Well, if you're just really focused on Blackness, those issues kind of go away. At least that was the illusion.
When in fact, history will prove that these did not make the problems go away. They actually expanded Black problems. Because as we see today, that type of mindset and culture has made Black people susceptible to frauds like BLM movement, which preys on their insecurities and their sense of identity as victims. And I might add that the Democratic Party loves when Black people live within a bubble of Blackness.
I was seduced by that. And so, yes, my wife and I took a trip to to Africa, beginning in Algeria. We, we met with the Black Panthers who were in exile there, and then we traveled south of the Sahara and to Ghana, where Nkrumah had been the president, to Senegal, where Leopold Senghor, these great sort of romantic
anti-colonialist figures,
anti-colonialist sort of revolutionary figures, dramatic to their countries, and it was a good lesson, very learned, very quick. Those countries were not doing well. They were disorganized. They were overwhelmed with corruption. There was no sort of common direction. They were lost. And they couldn't go back to being a colony again, and yet they also did not know how to go into the future and build a new nation.
And I can second that notion, and this is a great time for me to tell you a little story. If you don't already know, as soon as I got out of the university in the mid-90s, I went to a West African country and lived there for 4 years. It was my intention to quote-unquote repatriate. I was steeped in the Blackness and the Black communist type ideology, and I decided that I was going to go there and hopefully never return. And this is something that, to be honest, I wished most Black Americans would do, because they are against America. They feel as if they've never belonged, and they typically have either a very negative idea about all of the African nations, or they have this idealistic idea about African nations. And that is not to say that all African nations are a hot mess. I'm just simply saying it's different, and I'm also simply saying that because there are not the social net systems and social nets that are available to people there, life is a lot more difficult than it is in America. But I think it would be very informative for a lot of Black Americans to go there, because while Black Americans often talk about their oppression here, police brutality, and their poverty here, that does not compare to what I myself have witnessed firsthand, as well as what we see in documentaries and so forth and so on in various African nations. There is a lot of police brutality in African nations, which is, of course, Black on Black. There are a lot of oppressive behaviors. We've seen it in Nigeria now with the SARS. We've seen it in the Rwanda and the Tutsi genocide. We see it in so many nations where they attempt to really control the populations, and where the top upper echelon are the ones who receive most of the resources and wealth of the country, and they leave the rest just trying to figure out their daily bread. And there's also, again, that idea of poverty. You have no idea how many Africans would love to come to America and experience quote unquote American poverty, where the impoverished here have iPhones, they have large screen TVs, they have cars, they're buying the latest Jordans. And this is totally not the lifestyle of many Africans who are experiencing real poverty, where, for instance, if they don't even have enough to pay for hospital services, they just don't get seen. And they many times die from the very simplest of complications, or sometimes even from malaria. And at the same time, they do not have, Medicaid and Medicare and EBT and food stamps and things of that nature. That's just not possible there. And so I think it would be very informative for the youths who are out in these streets protesting for BLM Antifa, and who were talking about their impoverished, inequalities that they're experiencing here in America, as well as systemic oppression and racism, as well as police brutality. I'd like for them to actually extend their experience outside of the U.S., get some traveling in, and get some real life knowledge, and not just the communist rhetoric that they have been fed from public school through the university. And that is the main reason why, typical segments of the Black American populations are so antagonistic towards Black conservatives like myself, because many times we have traveled. We've been able to compare the experiences in other countries and the experiences here. We are able to see that looking at each particular component in regards to poverty or brutality or oppression, we are able to distinguish that what we are experiencing truly in 2020 is incomparable to what was experienced in the US in the 1940s, 50s, and beyond. Life has truly gotten better. The equalities between the different groups has, totally come to where it's comparable, as well as the ideology of poverty is truly, relative, I guess I want to say. And the fact that Black conservatives simply say we are capable of creating wealth within our communities, but it requires hard work, it requires focusing on that, as opposed to focusing on who's not giving us what, or who's not doing this or that for us, or who's not providing these programs, which has in fact made a vast majority of the underclass and, working poor quite dependent on programs. And these are programs that Black people did not have in the 1930s and 40s, where they were experiencing a great deal of expansion of Black wealth. Marriage rates were comparable to white marriage rates, if not in some cases higher than white marriage rates. And they were making great strides prior to the civil rights bills and then the so-called welfare state. And so it requires, introspection, and it requires that Black people get out of this concept of Blackness and join the American society and simply just get to work and stop worrying about some weird white supremacist somewhere, some militia somewhere in Utah, or, racism everywhere, when we are again seeing, especially in the 2020, 2019, 2020, there are so many Black men married to white women or dating and sleeping with them. So many interracial couples. If it was as racist as it was even in the 1980s, you did not see this level of, intermarriage. Even when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, it just wasn't possible. So to be in 2020 and to have, people finding love and relationships, and work conditions are so much better, and race relations within the jobs is actually outlawed in terms of negative race relations. It's just ridiculous to constantly say that, life in America as a Black person in 2020 is comparable to life in America as a Black person in 1900. It's just absolutely ridiculous. But because people have become so emotionally tied to this sense of victimhood, there's really not much that can happen in terms of allowing them to expand their mind, because they've just gotten so emotionally tied to it, and you just can't tell them any different. And that's a very unfortunate state. But generally, as Black people grow up, a lot of times, or any people, as they get out of their late teens and out of their 20s and experience real life, they begin to see things a little bit differently. And that is my hope, because there's been no other generation in America than those who are growing up today who are just this ideologically split, and so deeply tied to falsehoods, and then so violently emotionally prepared to defend these falsehoods. And so that is what's really, really scary, because unfortunately, this is not going to make their life better. The politicians, the Democrats, are not going to give them programs to actually help them get out of that mindset. And so therefore, they're just only going further and further in the hole. And as I always ask, BLM has taken in 1.2 billion, if not more at this point. Where is that money being dispersed within the quote unquote Black community? The Black community has not seen any of it. And so it's really, really tragic that they are using Black people's infused pain with these stories that are, overrated in terms of Black, death due to white cops. We see the numbers. There was literally 19 last year, and only a few of those were, wrongfully committed, in terms of the people were really unarmed when the cops thought they were armed, but the rest were armed. The rest were in the process of committing a crime and were resisting arrest. I'm not saying that they should have been killed, but at the same time, it's not like just the average Black person just walking outside their door and there's cops standing in there with guns pointed at them and they've done nothing. That is not happening. But unfortunately, we have young children who actually believe that. These are sometimes middle-class Black children in, middle America or some suburb, and they really have this idea that they're being hunted. And it's really, really sad, because that's not the case. But again, they've been fed this since K-12. So anyway, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on that. It's one of my passions, because where the mind goes, the body follows. And sometimes when your mind is living in a frightened shell, you tend to not take advantage of the opportunities that are literally right in front of your face. And so that affects one's entire life, and then one's family life, and that then, travels through the generations. And we want to get out of this cursed lifestyle and cursed mentality that keeps propelling itself through the generations, that's passed on from the parents to the child, instilling fear in children that they're going to be shot and that they can't breathe, and, let me live, and all of these very horrific, traumatic concepts that parents are feeding into the child. So listen, if you've enjoyed this content, please, please, please go ahead and subscribe. I am Leah Love, and I would love to have you click that notification bell. I've got so many more videos queued up, and I just want to continue sharing more and more. Please share these with people if you think that they could learn something from this. I'd love to hear your comments about this. If you have experienced this attachment to quote unquote Blackness that actually didn't help your life, that did not elevate your life to the point where you could fully participate in American society, that had you dreaming like a sky and a pie in some other country that you've never actually visited, or have you had that and then went ahead and visited a country and then got your eyes open to realize that it wasn't everything that you thought it was, and that now you have a newfound appreciation for America? I'd love to hear your comments either way. Comment below, and I'll see you next time.